Welcome Party Horror Stories. Logan had always craved quiet, real, uninterrupted silence. After years of battling the constant hum of city life, she decided to leave it all behind. Blackridge, a small town far from the reach of urban sprawl, seemed like the perfect place to start over. Surrounded by towering trees and hidden between the hills, it offered peace. A kind of peace Logan hadn't known in years. She rented a small cottage on the edge of town, a stone's throw from the forest. Its ivy-covered walls and faded charm called to her, whispering promises of comfort. It was late October when Logan finally arrived, the air cool with the bite of autumn. The first few days were blissfully uneventful. Her cottage was small but cozy, the kind of place where you could curl up and forget the world. But there was something unsettling about Blackridge. People were friendly, yes, but there was this strange air around them, an odd reserve, a sense that they were hiding something, though none of them would ever say it outright. Then, one evening, after a long day of unpacking, she returned home to find an invitation lying on her doorstep. It was thick, heavier than any regular piece of mail. She picked it up carefully, feeling the weight of it. The envelope was a deep cream sealed with red wax. She ran her fingers over the wax before breaking the seal, a small sigh escaping her lips as she opened it. Inside, the letter read, "You are cordially invited to Blackridge's annual welcome party at Harrow Manor. The festivities will begin promptly at 8 p.m. Formal attire requested." Logan paused. Harrow Manor? She had heard that name before. People had mentioned it, mostly in passing and always with a certain unease. Harrow Manor was an old mansion on the outskirts of town, a building as mysterious as it was grand. It had been abandoned for years, or so Logan had thought. Curiosity stirred within her, but so did a knot of discomfort. She wasn't sure why, but there was something about the invitation, about Harrow Manor, that didn't sit right with her. Still, she knew she needed to meet the people of Blackridge if she was going to fit in. A party, she told herself, would be a good chance to do just that. That evening, Logan dressed carefully, donning a simple black dress that hugged her frame just enough to feel elegant but not too showy. She slipped on a silver necklace that had once belonged to her mother, a small token of home. With a deep breath, she stepped outside and made her way toward the manor. The night was chilly, but not unbearable. The road to Harrow Manor twisted and turned, the tall trees on either side blocking out most of the moonlight. The manor itself appeared suddenly in the distance, looming over the landscape. It was like something from a forgotten storybook, its stone walls weathered by time, ivy climbing up its sides as though it were trying to escape. The gates creaked when Logan pushed them open, the sound of metal against rust hanging in the air like an omen. As she approached the front door, a man dressed in a butler's uniform greeted her with an air of quiet elegance. His dark eyes studied her with a strange intensity, but his smile never faltered. "Welcome to Harrow Manor, Miss Logan," he said, his voice smooth, almost too perfect. "We've been expecting you." Logan wasn't sure how to respond to that. A flutter of unease fluttered in her chest, but she smiled politely and followed him inside. The interior of Harrow Manor was grand, almost overwhelming. High ceilings stretched upward, adorned with crystal chandeliers that flickered softly in the dim light. The ballroom was packed with people in tuxedos and gowns, but their faces didn't seem quite right. The smiles were too perfect, their voices too measured, as though they were all playing parts in a story. No one seemed truly alive. Logan wandered, trying to push the feeling of discomfort aside. She needed to talk to someone, so she found herself chatting with a woman named Evelyn. Her smile was warm but strangely forced. It didn't reach her eyes. "It's so lovely to have you here, Logan," Evelyn said. "We always welcome newcomers to Blackridge. It's a very close-knit community." Logan forced a smile. "It's a beautiful town," she said, trying to make her voice sound casual, but she couldn't ignore the sense of being watched. Something was wrong here. The night dragged on. People continued to mingle, but the conversations felt so empty. No one seemed to say anything meaningful. Everyone was cordial, yes, but distant, polite, but not real. Logan felt herself growing more and more uncomfortable, her fingers trembling slightly as she clutched her glass of wine. She needed air. She excused herself and wandered down a long hallway that led away from the ballroom. The sounds of laughter and music faded as she ventured deeper into the manor. The hall was dimly lit, the flickering lights casting shadows on the old portraits hanging on the walls. At the end of the hall, Logan stumbled upon a study. Its door was cracked open just enough for her to slip inside. The room was filled with the heavy scent of old books and polished wood. It was quieter here, the only sound being her own breath and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. On the desk, she saw something that made her stomach tighten, an old ledger, its pages yellowed with age. She couldn't resist. She opened it, and as she flipped through the pages, her eyes widened in disbelief. Her name was written there, along with a date, today's date. Beneath it, a note in red ink, "Welcome to Blackridge. The circle is complete." Logan's heart raced. The words didn't make sense. She kept flipping, her hands shaking. There were other names, too, people she'd seen at the party. All of them had similar notes beneath their names. The circle is complete. She dropped the ledger, her breath coming in shallow gasps. What the hell was going on here? A voice from behind her made her freeze. "You shouldn't have gone looking." Evelyn's voice was cold, too calm. "This town, this celebration, it's not what you think." Logan spun around, her pulse racing. "What is this? What is happening here?" Evelyn stepped closer, her smile twisting into something darker. "Blackridge is timeless. It thrives on people like you. New blood. Every year we have a new welcome party. And you—" She paused, looking Logan up and down. "You are now part of us." Logan's throat tightened. She couldn't breathe. "No, this isn't real. This isn't happening." She backed away, her legs unsteady. "Oh, but it is," Evelyn said softly, her voice like ice. "And you won't be leaving. Not now. Not ever." Logan ran. She didn't know where she was going, but her feet moved, her body powered by pure panic. She bolted down the hall, her shoes clattering against the marble floors. The front door was in sight. She was almost there. But the moment she reached for the handle, it felt as though something invisible shoved her back. She stumbled and fell to the ground. When she looked up, the guests had gathered in the doorway. Their faces were all the same, empty, lifeless. Evelyn stepped forward. "It's no use, Logan. You can't leave. You belong here now." Logan screamed, but her voice wouldn't come. The guests surrounded her. Cold hands grabbed her arms, pulling her back toward the manor. She tried to fight, but the grip was too strong. Everything went black. When Logan awoke, she was back at her cottage. The morning sun streamed in through the window, bathing the room in a warm, golden glow. For a moment she thought it had all been a dream. But then on the table she saw the invitation again. But this time it was different. The words had changed. "Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next year." A cold shiver ran down her spine. This wasn't over. Blackridge wasn't a town you could leave, and she had become part of it, forever. This is The Welcome Party, horror story number 2. It was one of those evenings when everything felt just slightly off. The kind of night where the air feels thick, heavy, almost like it's pressing down on your shoulders. And Black Hollow, the quiet, sleepy town Lila had just moved to, seemed like it had been holding its breath for as long as anyone could remember. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the cobblestone streets. It should have been peaceful, but there was an undercurrent of something unsettling. Lila felt it the moment she stepped into the town. as though it was a place waiting for something, something that might never come. She had hoped that Black Hollow would be her escape, a place to disappear. After all, she wasn't used to staying in one place for long, moving from city to city, always searching, always running. But there was something different about Black Hollow. Quiet. Still. Maybe too still. But tonight was strange. As Lila walked toward the town square, she noticed a small crowd had gathered. It wasn't unusual, but the party atmosphere felt forced. There was a strange energy in the air, and though she couldn't put her finger on it, she felt it. That strange prickling at the back of her neck. People were talking, laughing, but no one seemed to be eating. No one was drinking. There was no real interaction happening. Just shallow, surface-level conversations. And there, standing at the center of it all, was a tall woman in a flowing, cream-colored gown, her posture elegant, her smile far too wide. It was unnatural. "Welcome to Black Hollow," the woman said, her voice booming across the crowd as she spotted Lila approaching. Lila hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond, but then her nerves pushed her forward. Thank you," she said, smiling, but feeling the unease tighten in her chest. There was something wrong about the way the woman's smile stretched, too wide, too perfect. The woman stepped forward. Her eyes locked onto Lila's, a spark of something in them that made Lila's stomach drop. "I'm Myrna," she said, her voice soft but with an edge that made Lila's breath catch. "I hope you feel at home here. This town has a way of making people belong." Lila nodded, swallowing hard. She didn't know why, but her pulse quickened. I think I'll be fine," she said, trying to sound casual, though the words came out strained, like a weak thread barely holding her together. Myrna didn't seem to notice. She beamed, her eyes gleaming. "Oh, I'm sure you will. You'll see. Black Hollow has a special way of welcoming people." Lila smiled back, though it felt more like a reflex than a true gesture. "I'm just passing through," she muttered, trying to make herself small in the crowd. Needed a break from the noise. Myrna's expression flickered for just a second, before that tight, perfect smile returned. "Of course. But sometimes a place like Black Hollow can offer more than just a break. It can offer belonging." Lila blinked. "Belonging?" she repeated, unsure of what to make of the words. Something in them didn't sit right with her. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything more, a tall figure stepped up beside Myrna. Theo, she assumed. He introduced himself with a practiced smile. "Theodore, welcome, Lila. We're all so excited to have you here." Lila took his hand, her grip a little too tight, like she was trying to steady herself. "Thanks. It's nice to meet everyone," she said, though her voice was barely more than a whisper. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, studied, by the crowd around her. The laughter of the people continued, but it was off, hollow, forced. There was no warmth to it, no comfort. They were all standing too still, too rigid. And then the music stopped. Lila didn't notice it at first. One moment it had been playing softly in the background, and the next it was just gone. And so was the laughter. An eerie silence filled the square, the kind of silence that presses down on your chest, making it hard to breathe. The crowd, the people standing around her, they weren't talking anymore. They were staring, watching, their eyes locked on her. And as the silence stretched on, Lila felt her breath quicken. The tightness in her chest grew until it felt suffocating. Myrna's voice broke the silence, cutting through the tension. "Welcome to the family, Lila," she said, her voice smooth, but with an edge of something darker. "We're so happy to have you with us." Lila's blood ran cold. Her pulse thudded in her ears. This wasn't normal. It wasn't a party. It wasn't a welcome. She wasn't welcome here. Myrna moved closer, her smile widening. Why did it feel so wrong? "Don't be shy, Lila," Myrna cooed. Everyone's so eager to meet you. You'll see, you're meant to be here. We all belong together after all." Lila tried to take a step back, but the crowd moved in, closer, too close, crowding her, their eyes never leaving her. Her chest tightened, her heart pounding, her thoughts racing. I think I need to go," Lila stammered, her voice cracking with panic. She spun around, attempting to push her way through the crowd, but the path ahead of her seemed to stretch, shift. The town square, the entire town, was closing in around her. The streets twisted unnaturally, and it was as though the town itself was pulling her deeper, trapping her. A voice called out behind her, Theo's voice, sharp and final. "Where do you think you're going, Lila?" Lila turned, her breath quick, chest rising and falling in sharp gasps. I'm leaving," she said, though her voice faltered. "I don't belong here." But Theo didn't smile. His face was unreadable, his eyes cold. "No, Lila," he said, his voice low. "You do belong here. You'll see." Lila backed up, turning to run once more, but the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, the buildings around her looming higher and higher. She wasn't escaping. She couldn't escape. With one final, hopeless glance back, she saw them, all of them, watching her, waiting for her to fall into their fold. The town, the family, was closing in. Lila couldn't breathe. There was no way out. Black Hollow had already claimed her. She was theirs, and there was no leaving. This is The Welcome Party, Horror Story number 3. Adeline had just moved to Ashcroft, a small, quiet town tucked away in the hills, far from the noise and chaos of the city. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, a place where things stayed the same year after year. But as she unpacked boxes in her new cottage on the outskirts of town, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't the town itself. It was the people, or rather the way they looked at her. Most greeted her with a polite smile, but there was always a lingering pause, a strange hesitation before they spoke. It didn't help that she didn't know anyone yet, not really. But then, something unexpected happened. A thick envelope appeared in her mailbox one evening, tucked between a stack of bills and junk mail. She tore it open, curiosity piqued. The letter inside was elegantly written with gold-trimmed edges and neat, flowing handwriting. "You are invited to the annual welcome party at the Hollow Crest Estate. We look forward to your presence at 8 p.m. sharp. Dress accordingly." Adeline's eyes scanned the words over and over. A party? At the Hollow Crest Estate? It seemed odd. She had heard of the estate, an old mansion on the outskirts of town that the locals barely spoke of, as though it held secrets they weren't willing to share. And now, out of nowhere, an invitation? To her? She tried to brush it off, telling herself that it was just a way to welcome newcomers. But something inside her churned uneasily. There was a coldness in the air, an unsettled feeling that wouldn't go away. Still, she knew it was a chance to meet people, to feel like she belonged. The night of the event arrived, and Adeline stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her dress, her fingers trembling just slightly. She wasn't sure why, but she felt different. It was like the air had thickened around her, each breath coming slower, harder. But she dismissed it. She would be fine. She could hear the wind howling outside as she made her way to the estate. The roads were eerily empty, and the headlights of her car cut through the fog like a knife. The closer she got, the heavier her heart seemed to beat. There was a strange sense of anticipation, like she was walking into a world that wasn't quite her own. When she arrived at the Hollow Crest Estate, it loomed before her, the towering stone walls casting long shadows. The mansion looked ancient, its windows dark and empty. A single light flickered dimly inside, barely visible from the outside. Adeline hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the invitation, feeling the weight of it like a stone in her hand. The door of the mansion creaked open, as though waiting for her to step inside. She took a deep breath and pushed through. The inside was like something out of a dream. The air smelled faintly of dust and aged wood, like it had been untouched for years. The foyer was grand but cold, with towering ceilings and long dark hallways stretching out of sight. Adeline stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. The silence was so thick, she could almost hear her heartbeat. Then she heard it, a soft hum of voices, a gentle murmur coming from the distance. Adeline followed the sound, each step heavier than the last. She reached the ballroom doors, her breath catching in her throat. The doors opened on their own, almost as if they had been expecting her. The room was full. People stood in groups talking quietly, dressed in dark, elegant attire. Their faces were hidden behind masks, delicate and ornate. Some of the masks were pale white, others dark and elaborate, their features impossible to read. Adeline stood frozen at the entrance, unsure of what to do. She had never seen anything like this before. The music was soft, but uncomfortably loud, reverberating through her chest. A woman in a red dress stepped forward. She was tall, her movements fluid, and her smile seemed perfectly rehearsed. "Welcome, Adeline," she said, her voice smooth and almost too calm. "We've been waiting for you." Adeline swallowed hard, trying to smile in return. How do you know my name?" Her voice trembled, and she felt a cold sweat form on the back of her neck. The woman didn't answer, instead waving her hand toward the others. "Come, join us," she said. "Everyone is eager to meet you." Adeline stepped forward, her feet almost moving of their own accord. But with every step, her unease grew. The people in the room were staring at her, no, watching her. Their eyes were sharp, too sharp. There was something hollow in their expressions. She tried to smile at a few of them, but the words they spoke to her didn't quite make sense. They felt rehearsed, hollow, like they weren't saying what they really meant. As the night dragged on, Adeline's discomfort grew. She excused herself from conversations, trying to find an exit, but the rooms seemed to stretch on, the walls closing in. Her head was spinning, her vision blurring. She felt the weight of the eyes upon her, the whispering murmurs that never quite stopped. They were watching her, studying her. Her breath quickened. She needed to get out of here. But every door she tried was locked. The windows were shut tight. She couldn't leave. It was like she was trapped in a dream. The walls felt too close, the people too distant, too cold. And then, as though the room had been waiting for the right moment, the lights flickered. The music warped, the strings screeching out of tune, the beat distorted, growing louder, almost deafening. Adeline's heart pounded in her chest. A man in a dark suit stepped toward her. He had a mask on, but unlike the others, his mask was cracked, the lines jagged and uneven. His smile was wide, too wide. "You don't understand, do you, Adeline?" His voice was low, soothing, but it sent chills through her. "This is where you belong. You've always belonged here." Adeline's breath caught in her throat. I don't want to be here. Please, I need to leave." The man's smile only grew, his eyes narrowing behind the mask. "You can't leave. You're already part of us." Before she could respond, the room seemed to come alive. The others stepped closer, their voices rising in unison, chanting in a language Adeline didn't recognize. They circled her, their eyes glowing behind their masks. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. "Welcome to the family, Adeline. Welcome to the family." Her chest tightened, and she couldn't breathe. The room spun. The walls were closing in. She felt the weight of their presence pressing against her, trapping her in place. The sound of their voices, their chanting, filled her ears. "Welcome to the family." Her knees buckled and she sank to the floor, her body trembling. This wasn't a party. This was a ritual, a sacrifice. She had been brought here not to be welcomed, but to become part of something darker, something older, something she could never escape from. Welcome to the family. And that was when she understood. The Hollowcrest estate wasn't just a home, it was a prison. And now she was its newest resident.